I believe that a really good way to understand a culture is through its gardens. This is an extraordinary journey to visit 80 inspiring gardens from all over the world. Some are very well known, like the Taj Mahal or the Alhambra. And I'm also challenging my idea of what a garden actually is. So I'm visiting gardens that float on the Amazon, a strange fantasy in the jungle, as well as the private homes of great designers, and the desert flowering in a garden. And wherever I go, I shall be meeting people that share my own passion for gardens, on my epic quest to see the world through 80 of its most fascinating and beautiful gardens.
This is my very first visit to India, and I confess that it's daunted me more than anywhere else in the world.
I know that this is a country of fierce natural extremes, with the weather alternating between drought and torrential monsoon rains. However, I also know that this beautiful country holds a rich gardening tradition, and that's what I want to explore.
And through its gardens, hopefully, I'll be able to make sense of the country.
I begin my journey in the imperial state of Rajasthan and the gardens of India's imperial past. Then, travelling south to Kerala, I find gardens founded upon the tea and spice trade. Finally, I'll return north to Chandigarh, an extraordinary garden that was created in secret in the middle of the jungle. Nowhere on this planet is more sensuous than India. The colours, scents, sounds, food and sheer physicality create a vibrant turmoil that you simply can't avoid. Now clearly this is exhilarating, but it's also rather overwhelming, and surrounded by this sensuous assault, it's hard to know where to begin. So I decide to start at India's most famous and most visited site, but what many tourists don't realise when they make their pilgrimage is that in fact this is a garden. So I begin my journey at dawn to visit the most iconic building on the planet. Of course, the hardest thing on any really well-known monument, and there is no monument in the world better known than the Taj Mahal, is to react, trying to forget all the images you see. Just as when you see some extraordinary beauty, the reaction is to still you. It stops you in your tracks, and there's not a lot to say. All you can do is just experience it. The Taj Mahal is the most spectacular example of a Mughal tomb garden. Mughal architecture and gardens were always inseparably entwined, and the basic template for the gardens was taken from the description in the Quran of heaven, which is depicted as a garden. The Mughal garden was always divided into 4 quadrants, with water an essential feature. Each quadrant was subdivided again with raised pathways, although these were remodelled as large lawns under the British-led restoration. In the centre of the garden is a large marble tank from which run 4 broad canals in which the ghostly reflection of the tomb is held and shimmers. This was a garden intended literally as paradise on earth, a living mirror of heaven. The Taj Mahal is a monument to one of history's great love stories. The Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan built it as the final resting place of his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal. Its construction took 20,000 men, 22 years to complete, and every inch, every stone is a testament of love and sorrow.
The marble up here is blindingly white. As the sun rises and it gets hotter, it makes a stark contrast to the green of the garden, and I'm sure that's deliberate. You walk through this garden and arrive at this very austere, very pure place. White marble. And then inside the tomb itself, it's very dark. No photography allowed. All you can do is go from this brilliant light into the gloom.
The famous gardens at the front of the main building are not original, having been restored during the first quarter of the 20th century following centuries of gradual neglect. But what lies beyond the tomb is far less known and much more accurately preserved. Across the river, ruins can be seen. Over the centuries, a myth grew up that Shah Jahan had intended to build himself a twin tomb there, but in black marble, the Black Taj, a mirror image of his wife's in all but colour.
But I think the truth is actually much more interesting, because the work done since the early 90s has proven that in fact this was not a tomb, but an extension of the garden of the Taj Mahal. And down here, what you have is a vast tank which would have been full of water, coming right in amongst these lotus leaf filigrees. You can imagine the water scalloped in there. And a beautiful pavilion around it, from which people could view the mausoleum, the white marble, reflected in the water across the river. Now what that means is that the Taj Mahal is the centre of the garden, both figuratively and literally, with a beautiful and extraordinarily grand garden in front of it and across the river behind it. And through the archaeological work, they've managed to reconstruct the garden much more faithfully than that which you see in front of the building, or in fact any of the other Mughal gardens. It's planted up really densely with trees and shrubs, with flowers and fruit, all of which are designed to enrich the senses. So what you have is a paradise garden, and that was deliberate. That is what Shah Jahan intended for his bride to have around her as she lay dead.
Shah Jahan's reign was long and glorious, but it ended as it began, with tragedy. Not in his paradise garden, but a few miles down the river, in the Red Fort of Agra. Having created for posterity the heavenly beauty of the Taj Mahal, it was here, in the old ruling palace of the Mughals' Indian Empire, with most of its magnificent buildings still standing today, that Shah Jahan ended his reign. Not on the throne, but as a captive.
But for the last 7 years of his life, he was kept a prisoner here by his own son. And although it was a very grand prison, a gilded cage if you like, it did mean that this balcony behind me was the closest that he could get to the Taj Mahal. So he would come and gaze out down the river to where his dead wife lay. undoubtedly the Taj Mahal is the great cultural icon of India, and it's essential visiting. It's actually only one part of its garden story. About an hour down the road at Sikandra is Akbar's tomb. And this, with its garden, contains an element that even the Taj Mahal can't match.
It was built by Shah Jahan's grandfather, the Emperor Akbar, who ruled from 1556 to 1605, and in many ways it's the precursor of the Taj Mahal.
But what makes it extremely unusual is to this day it is still filled with extraordinary animals. Well, I came, of course, to see the animals. What I hadn't expected was a sandstorm, which is really whipped up out of nowhere, but it's not ideal because all the animals have run away.
I managed to grab my hat before it disappears. The storm passes and the animals return. There are langurs with their young lining up to be admired and fed, and blackbuck testing out their fine corkscrew horns. And there are peacocks too, outdazzling everyone and everything. The Mughals valued all aspects of nature, and the menagerie was seen as an integral part of a true paradise garden. Hunting was one of the great Mughal pleasures, and so the animals also provided the emperors with sport. But they were only part of any Mughal garden, and never the main focus of interest. Remember, the gardens were based upon the Islamic ideal of paradise.
Paradise was a place which, above all, had abundant water. And so water was always a part of paradise gardens, and the whole Islamic Mughal garden mythology was centered around water. And a large tank of water was always central and also significant. The bigger the tank, the more important the garden. So this is a real whopper of a tank in a very dry part of the country. And then you have these rills which it overflowed into. And you can see how lovely it would be if that was water and catching the sunlight, this silver line going straight down to the doorway and then leading to the tomb. And it's really sad that it's empty and dry. And I can only suppose that water is in such shortage at this dry time of year that it just can't be afforded. The walkways are raised right above the garden with what looked to me like holders for torches, so you could see it at night. And by looking down on it, you would see the flowers below you, and across into what would have been trees with the animals amongst them. And it wasn't until the British came and cleared most of the trees to make it look like a Capability Brown park that you had grassland.
The Mughals were empire builders, successfully invading India from Afghanistan in 1526. And during the subsequent 3 centuries, they created a fantastically opulent dynasty.
What I find really staggering about this place, Akbar's tomb, and of course the Taj Mahal, is that they are tombs, they're not palaces, and yet they're enormous, glorious places. And it makes you realise, apart from anything else, how rich they must have been. Almost incomprehensible.
During the 16th and 17th centuries, Mughal society was at the height of its cultural and artistic sophistication. Akbar's tomb and the Taj Mahal were only 2 of the many magnificent gardens of that era. And while most now lie in ruins, all bear witness to that golden age of Mughal power. Before the Mughals established their rule, India was a series of individual, mainly Hindu states, each with its own ruler or Maharaja. The Mughals were canny enough not to sweep away this existing culture, but gave them wealth and power and let them keep their religion. So the Maharajas continued to build and maintain their own palaces and gardens, although their gardens were not devoted to Allah, but to pleasure.
Thank you.
In my next garden, the principal pleasure is relief from the unbearable Rajasthan summer heat. Built in the mid-18th century, the Monsoon Garden at Deeg was a large palace with a whole range of gardens, all devoted to cooling display and entertainment. The Mughal gardens were based strictly upon order, restraint and harmony, and although Deeg, made 100 years after the Taj Mahal, does show many Mughal influences, it's frankly extrovert, slightly kitsch and technically ingenious.
From up here on the roof you can see clearly the layout of the Chaba, or the Mughal 4 quadrants of the garden. The key difference is in the way that water is used, because in Islamic and Mughal gardens it tended to be tinkling and modest, whereas here it's festive. It's a shocking great display, and I think that's the key to the difference between the Mughals and the Maharajas. They did like to party, and they liked to party as extravagantly as possible. The water needed for the fountains and all the other extraordinary displays of water that they used in the garden all had to be brought up here into this tank, which holds apparently 600,000 gallons, every single drop of which had to be drawn up. Now, before it was filled, all these holes around the outside, and there are hundreds of them, were stopped up with wooden bungs. It could be filled up and it would just sit there. Then, if you wanted water to go to particular parts of the garden, or even particular fountains, you pulled out the appropriate bung and down it went.
They could even change the colour of the fountains by adding dye to the water.
Now, this enormous quantity of water was drawn up from a big, deep well there by a wheel into a huge leather bucket that would just bounce on the edge there, and that was drawn by ropes by a pair of oxen, and you can see that the ropes over the years have worn a groove in the stone, and the oxen will go downhill drawing up the full leather bucket of water and then come back up here. And this job of one man just to tip the water out onto this slope. It ran down into this corner underneath the walkway into the tank, and it took that team a whole month to fill it up. To get the most from this garden, it's important to imagine it as a place filled with water. Instead of being sort of monolithic, stony lines, these canals will be light and silvery and reflecting the sky and the greenery. There will be colour from the different fountains, colour from the reflections, colour from the people in their gorgeous clothes walking around. It will be a place of festival and entertainment and light, and not this sort of semi-archaeological place, which is fascinating, but doesn't really do it justice at all. This cage jutting out from the side of the building where everyone could see it was to house a tiger. The ingenuity of the waterworks is extraordinary,
and they culminate in one outrageous performance in this building.
This pavilion is just a combination of the Maharaja's extravagance. I think it's the most opulent thing I've ever seen in the garden anywhere in the world. It's the Monsoon Pavilion, and it was used to simulate and recreate the monsoon. There was a wide canal surrounding the central area with large fountains that would flow. And the roof is a false roof, and effectively it's a water tank filled up from the basin across on the large roof. And when it was full, water would run down from small pipes on the inside to create a curtain of rain. So the Maharaja and his friends and family could sit on the inside and look through this wall of rain, just like the monsoon.
There were also, incredibly, metal balls inside the hollow columns that banged together as the water flowed past them, simulating thunder. The whole thing, an orgy of water, noise, and blessed coolness.
So you had the rumble of thunder, the crashing of the water, the fragrance of the rain, all that would last for an afternoon. And that piece of theatre would take the entire tank on the roof that took a month to fill. Now, I would go on into the central area, but it's occupied by rhesus macaques, who've made it very clear that it's their territory, and they certainly don't want me or anywhere else on, and I'm advised that they have a very nasty bite.
From the vantage point of the top tank, you can see that Deeg is set in a parched landscape. So this extravagance of the water garden was a dramatic statement of the wealth and power of the owner. The two huge lower tanks were a key part of the garden's water system, but today it is being used only by local people to wash clothes and themselves. The jubilant watery celebrations belong really to the past, and for much of the time the garden sits silent and dry. But my next garden is a Maharaja's pleasure garden that is being brought expertly back to life. So I make the journey 4 hours drive west of Deeg to Jaipur, the Red City and the capital of Rajasthan, whose broad streets are 4 times as densely populated as London, and they throng with hectic life.
However much you prepare yourself for India and read about it, nothing can really ready you for the sanctuary of the soul. Everything you look at is an extraordinary picture. The colours, the sounds, the scents, the tastes are so vivid that it is genuinely overwhelming. You feel submerged from time to time. And it's all rather wonderful.
The garden I've come to see lies just outside the old city.
The water garden at Deeg is very beautiful, but it is a ghost garden. You feel that without the water and without lots of people, it doesn't truly come alive. Well, this is a very different kettle of fish. It's very alive, but it's in a state of disrepair.
This is the Jal Mahal, and every year, after the monsoon rains have fallen, this garden comes truly into its own.
Now in the middle of the dry season, it looks as though Jal Mahal is set on the edge of a potential landfall site, but actually it's positioned in the middle of a giant lake, and when the monsoons come, this will fill right up.
A vast wall barricades the valley, creating a dam to hold the water that pours off the mountains to form the lake which surrounds the building. So this isn't a garden containing a water feature, but a water feature containing a garden.
In fact, there's so much water that at the peak of the floods, the whole of the lower story will be flooded, and you can see that the windows are staggered diagonally to provide different landing stages for visitors as they came to the building.
But for the moment, visitors are barred since the site is being restored. Luckily, that doesn't include us.
This building may look from the outside like another wonderful palace, but in fact the whole thing exists to support a pleasure garden. And when it came to pleasure, the Maharajas bowed to no one.
What style they had! They created an artificial island, shaped it like a palace, and then flooded an entire valley simply to create a lovely garden. And although it's fallen into disrepair, the garden is being restored and reinvented with the help of the American garden designer Mitch Kreitz. What are you hoping to achieve here? What's the plan?
The first phase will be to complete the garden, and we're calling it the Chameli Bog. Chameli means jasmine, and jasmine is a very beautiful, fragrant flower and scents the entire garden. And then inside the garden, we've taken a floral arabesque design, which is a fusion of all of those elements that have come from the past: Hindu, Muslim, Mughal, Persian. Jaipur, probably, maybe only Florence and a few other cities in the world have so many living arts and crafts. These stone carvers, without any doubt, their ancestors were employed to create the original city of Jaipur in the 18th century, and these skills have been passed on from generation to generation.
You're saying that the same families of craftsmen are still working on this that worked on the original building?
No one is in touch with second millennium BC roots the way India is. And that makes India very special.
You've lived here for over 40 years. Tell me what it's like to experience the monsoon. I can hardly imagine.
Well, it's an extraordinary time. This is April. The heat hasn't even hit yet. Heat and dust hasn't even hit. Soon it will become hotter. It will become 47, 48, 49 degrees. And then the sky will turn yellow, and the sun will turn lavender, and it becomes hotter and hotter and more humid, and you know that the rain is up there, but it doesn't come down, and you feel like clawing at the sky and make it come down, because it's there, but it doesn't fall. When it falls, anybody, your children, adults, you're riding in a car, you get out of the car and you stand in the rain. You just stand there. Thank God it's come. Finally it's come. It's a great, great relief.
The garden's empty because it's the middle of the day and it is quite phenomenally hot, heroically hot. And everybody, other than the odd mad dog and one even madder Englishman, is taking refuge from the sun. But seeing it in its empty state, it reinforces the fact that this is the first of my gardens I've seen in the process of being made, in very early stages too. And that's interesting and exciting because it brings to life the continuity that is expressed here. The continuity of materials that come from the same quarries, of craftsmanship, even of craftsmen, because it was their ancestors that made the original building 2.5 centuries ago, that were connected to the people that made the Taj Mahal, that go back thousands of years. But while the Maharajas built their grand palaces for spectacular outward display, there's another type of Hindu garden I very much want to see, one created primarily to satisfy inner needs.
If you're not careful, it's easy to assume that a culture is best represented by the gardens of the great and the good. But it's not all Maharaja's palaces here in Rajasthan. And true Hindu gardens can be found best in temples. And I'm now going to see a very modest temple with its own little courtyard garden.
My guide to the sacred plants of this Hindu temple garden is Saurabh Sinclair.
Shoes off. Is that really important?
It is. It's to keep the purity of the space.
They haven't seen my feet then.
That's part of your purity at the moment.
Now, you say this is a typical Hindu garden.
That's correct. This is a temple garden, really. I mean, everything here is, because it's auspicious or it's worshipped, it's got the jasmine,
Right.
the banana, people tree,
Which is essential.
Yeah. The branches look more like the roots, and they believe that's how it connects the two worlds together, that it's upside down.
My feet are connecting rather painfully to the sun. It is so hot.
We should move to the temple.
Oh, that's really hot.
There's a warm courtyard.
Now, this obviously is the temple itself.
This is the main temple. There's a little Krishna temple around the corner, but this is the main sanctity of the temple. Mataji, wo tulsi laiye jara.
And what were you asking for now?
I was asking for the blessings, which would be the water with some basil in it, so that you can be blessed.
Right. So what do I have to do? It's a big bit of basil. That works. It's all falling out.
That's it.
Partly the rabbit hole, I think.
So just touch it to your lips and over your head.
Okay.
That's it.
Fully blessed.
I'll show you the plant. It's right here if you can brave the courtyard again.
Right. So it looks sort of a bit like marjoram, doesn't it? But it's... Oh
Yeah,
gosh,
exactly.
It's much more pungent and intense.
They continuously pluck it to place into the water, to place on lunar eclipses in your food. They use the seeds to give it to widows so that they keep their chaste.
Quells their lust.
Quells their love.
The design of this little garden isn't important. That's not the point. The plants here are being grown solely as material for fragrant offerings or for their religious aims.
Bye-bye, have a good journey. This small temple garden is actually closest to the pure Hindu idea of a garden that there is. But the Mughals were very wise when they let Hinduism exist. And places like this could continue as they always have done for centuries. And the Maharajas didn't reject all the Mughal influences. They absorbed them and made something of their own. And again, there was a coexistence.
If there is such a thing as a typical, truly Indian garden, then I suppose that this is it. And it's interesting that the most humble and practical of gardens is still in constant use, while those of the rich and powerful eventually fall away. And the main reason for this is that here in the bone-dry north of India, water is so precious that you need incredible wealth just to maintain a garden. And when the money dried up, so did the gardens. But down south, in the lush hills of Kerala, the climate is so perfect for plants, almost all plants, that money practically grows on trees. For over 1,000 years, traders have made fortunes in the port of Cochin, and the town is deliciously infused with the smell of the commodity that lured them here, the warm, exotic sense of spice. The influence of a succession of spice merchants from around the world can still be seen in the old Dutch streets, the 16th century Portuguese church, and most dramatically, in the beautiful Chinese fishing nets.
Spices have drawn people here from the other side of the world for hundreds and hundreds of years. The Chinese were the first to come here. When the Portuguese came at the end of the 15th century, then the Dutch took over at the end of the 17th century, and finally the British took possession at the beginning of the 19th century. So there's been wave upon wave of colonization based entirely upon the spice trade.
Given its geographical position, the coast of southern India is a natural staging post for trade between the west and the Far East. But what makes it ideal for the spice trade are the perfect growing conditions in the lush green hills inland. Hot, wet and steamy, and yet critically cooled by cloud, the mountain jungles are rich with treasure growing on the hillsides. These forests are the indigenous habitat of some of the most valuable plants in the world. So, appropriately enough, my next visit is to a spice garden. Part smallholding, part permaculture, and part botanical garden, Mr. Abraham's plot defies categorization. But one thing is instantly apparent. It is expertly tended, with some of the world's most sought-after plants growing happily here in his tame piece of jungle. The star of the garden is a plant native to Kerala, which finds its way onto practically every dining table in the world.
And you can see the pepper here. See the pepper growing. See?
So it grows as a little bundle of seeds.
Actually, when the flower comes, it is white in color.
Yes.
And when the rainwater oozes from top to bottom, the pollination happens.
So it's pollinated by rainwater.
Yeah.
Right.
No honeybees, no wind. It is through the rainwater the pollination happens. If no rain, no fruit grows. And you see when they ripe, they become red color. You see the red color here. And if you peel the skin off and dry, that is white pepper.
Right.
See the green and red and dry in the sun.
Yeah.
Within one day, both these will change to black color.
Which do you prefer?
Want to taste one pepper?
Let's try that one.
With the skin. White one. That is the most strong one.
Alright, I can take it. See if I'm mad enough.
Do you have a bottle of water with you?
No. I was drunk. It's nice. It's good. It's not nasty. It's just hot.
It's hot.
Yeah.
And a high flavor. And you know it is the best pepper in the world.
Really?
Yeah, it's a pepper originated in Kerala.
And it did come from here?
Yeah.
I tell you what, this big. The pepper's just
Take the water.
I haven't got any water. But I will survive. Well, he did warn me. Then Mr. Abraham led me to a stand of another very valuable native Kerala spice. Now this is cardamom, is it?
This is cardamom, the queen of spice.
Queen of
You know,
spices.
that's the fruit. See here. See, the fruit grows in, we call it panicle, you know, it comes
panicle,
just at the bottom of the plant. This is the plant actually.
Right.
It grows up in the shade, you know, under the trees, bigger trees only. You want to taste some fresh cardamom?
Do you know, I honestly don't know what cardamom tastes like. But I mean, it is a really important spice, isn't it?
It's a real, it is the taste of India.
The taste of India.
The
Well, I've
taste
got
of
to
India.
taste it, haven't I?
It is used in tea, coffee, in sweet preparation, meat preparation, and in so many medicines it is used. It is very good for blood circulation, like ginger.
It's very seductive.
Mr. Abraham and his family have been growing spices on this plot entirely organically for 3 generations. As always, it's fascinating to see something that you hardly think of as a plant at all growing in its natural home.
That is coffee.
Yes, I thought I recognised it. I did recognise that. But I've never seen coffee in flower.
This is coffee arabica.
Oh,
Nice
it's
smell,
lovely.
huh?
It's like jasmine.
Like jasmine. It smells
Yeah.
like jasmine.
What's this in the corner here?
That is the turmeric. And you see, it is the root of the turmeric that is the real spice. Yeah.
So this is the root from that
I
plant.
will pinch it. You see the color.
Lovely. Can I break this?
Yeah.
So you're going to try.
The fresh one is mostly used for medicines against snake bites, spider bites, and so on. You know, it kills all the poison.
In India, you have the relationship between health and food sorted out. And it's very sophisticated and very successful. In the West, we don't do this, and it's clumsy.
You can start.
You're dead right. We can start, and we should start.
I think that one of the best ways to understand the past is to smell and taste it. And seeing these spices growing, underlined the extraordinary historical wealth to be had from India, based upon plants that could be easily grown and then traded at vast profit. The tropical mountain climate is not just ideal for growing spices, but also another plant, introduced by the British from China, and which provides the raw ingredient for the one thing I always miss most on my travels, a nice cup of tea. The British originally introduced tea growing to India in the early 19th century, when tea was moving from the preserve of refined society to ordinary working people. This was encouraged mainly because it was an alternative to alcohol, but also because it needed boiling so the water was purified, making it a safe as well as a temperate drink. I hadn't expected tea to make such a bewitching scene. Walking through it is like wading through a vast bristly green sculpture.
The tea crop makes for the most beautiful landscape because the bushes are organized in a series of crazed patterns like drying mud, and that mixture of uniformity and rhythmic but irregular change is just like a lot of modern topiary. In fact, I go so far as to say that this is as beautiful as many a garden. They're called tea gardens. Now, it raises that perennial question, when is a garden not a garden? But I think in a place like this, that question becomes irrelevant. The whole thing just evaporates into one beautiful, man-made arrangement of plants.
All tea is produced from the leaves of camellias. In fact, the vast majority of all tea comes from one particular species, which is Camellia sinensis, the Chinese camellia. And it's just these tender leaves that are picked, and it's that produces your morning cuppa. These perfectly manicured hillsides are a combination of natural and man-made beauty, although I suspect that the women working in them might see them in a slightly less ecstatic way. They are maintained to look like this only as a result of their constant labour, with much of the crop still harvested entirely by hand. They are called tea gardens, but I'm not going to count them as one of my 80 gardens, although it was fascinating to see them. However, the tea company here does maintain a real garden at its head office. That's where I'm going to now. The railway garden is built around a decommissioned railway station in the hill town of Munnar. But crikey, it's a rum-do. It's just like stepping into a hand-tinted postcard of a 1930s British garden.
This is a very strange place. I'm not sure I know what to make of this at all. So you've got hydrangeas, just like my grandfather used to grow. And snapdragons, salvias, astromerias, all the ingredients of an English garden. But it doesn't look like any kind of English garden that I've seen for, 30, 40 years?
This garden looks like a pre-war time warp, but astonishingly it was created as recently as 1980.
These rows of salvias and white alyssum. Now white alyssum takes me back. When I was a child, The bedding by the front door, year in, year out, was white alyssum and pelargonium. But what's curious is that anybody over 50 coming from England would recognise lots of elements of this garden with a sort of dreamy nostalgia. But anybody under 35 or 40 would recognise practically nothing here. It would be completely surreal. When was this tree been picked?
Yesterday.
Really?
Yeah. We've got a yearly flower show that we have, and it's organized by the YWCA, that's the Young Women's Christian Association. And every year the garden comes first. It's got so many flowers around, it really makes you feel good. I like the entire garden, it's beautiful.
Is it deliberately evoking British connections?
This garden has a lot of British touch in it, but I think if you go elsewhere you may not find a garden as beautiful as this.
And in general, do people like those British connections, or is it something that is done for historical reasons, or because they generally like the result?
I think they do like the British Association. Like they've left behind a lot of cultures which we still do follow.
This garden is a relic from colonial days, although in fact the Raj was already a distant memory when it was created, but in its own dotty way, I think it's completely charming.
You know what it's like? It's like ladies sitting by the sea in a row, quite comfortable with their lives, but looking back over it rather than looking forward.
For all the eccentric Englishness of the garden, as I leave, I'm confronted with a reminder that I'm actually a long way from home.
We're walking out here because there's an elephant on the back of a lorry there. Don't know what it's doing, I don't know where it's going. But I've never seen an elephant by that before. What a beautiful, beautiful animal. Last night, one of the production team was woken up by a terrible crashing in the night and couldn't imagine what it was, and went out and it was an elephant tearing up the garden in the hotel. Seeing that makes you realise that we are in another country here. Okay, this is not something I ever thought I'd say. Follow that elephant.
I'm now going back north to visit a much more potent symbol of British influence on India, the capital city of New Delhi. New Delhi was designed by the British as a statement of power and order, established with massive confidence in stone, parks and grand vistas. It is landscape architecture on a breathtaking scale.
I've seen pictures of this or photographs, but actually in the flesh it's much more impressive. The whole scale is much bigger than I'd imagined.
In 1912, the building of New Delhi began. It was to be a city suited to the grandeur of its status as India's new capital. And this enormous project was given to a relatively young and unknown English architect, Sir Edwin Lutyens.
Now, the extraordinary thing about Lutyens is that although he was a wonderful architect and designer, actually I know him best as a garden designer, because he and Gertrude Jekyll did a whole series of gardens at the beginning of the 20th century, which you can still visit. So, for me, this takes me from the highways and byways of England to the imperial capital of the British Raj. An interesting little detail I've just noticed is that on the metalwork of the gates here, you've got the Tudor rose of England alternating with the lotus, the symbol of Hindu India. Lutyens was an extraordinary man, able to work in an astonishing range of forms, drawing inspiration wherever he found it. Here in New Delhi, I believe that he struck exactly the right note, mixing imperial pomp with its Mughal and Hindu heritage. The thing that I find really extraordinary is that Lutyens, who is capable of designing sort of exquisite, relatively small gardens and light fittings and kitchen surfaces, could simultaneously be designing this vast imperial city. Lutyens incorporated parks, avenues and trees into his design for New Delhi, not only making it a beautiful green city, but also a cooler one, providing shade and lowering the temperature of the centre by several degrees. I think New Delhi is a masterpiece, and despite being created as a statement of imperial power, it's an honourable inheritance from the British Raj. The irony of New Delhi is that by the time it was completed in the early 30s, it was almost redundant. Within 10-15 years, the British Empire in India was over, and it became just another piece of its past. Like the Red Fort behind me, built by Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal. That is a symbol of the lost Mughal Empire. And through the gardens, I've just seen the way that cultures come and go, and they adopt and absorb each other. And that's how they survive. It's like the streets where different colours and creeds and religions all mingle in this chaos, but somehow seem to be remarkably tolerant. But before I leave India, and before I finish this journey, I'd love to see a modern garden and see where India possibly is going to. And so I'm making one final journey, catching the 8:30 express from Delhi, heading north to Chandigarh in the foothills of the Himalayas. I'm off to visit a garden famous not just for its completely unique beauty, but also for the incredible story of its creation. This is 25 acres of labyrinthine sculpted gardens. It is a bizarre and magical vision of modern India. The rock garden of Chandigarh is the creation of a single man who started building it in the 50s in a clearing in the jungle, using just stones and waste material and without telling a soul. See, this is all the waste. It looked like broken loos actually in basins as much as anything. See, that's from a urinal. Says he touching it. These are all insulators, aren't they? It's beautiful. And presumably these are water pots. Created on land its maker didn't even own. For years it was undiscovered, a totally secret fantasy. But in 1971 it was finally stumbled upon and very nearly bulldozed. But to their eternal credit, the local authorities realised that it was a work of genius, and not only decided to keep it, but gave its maker, Nek Chand, now an old man, their full support. Why in this place? Why here?
I knew this place, no building will be erected at any time. This is the open space.
And why did you do it? What made you do this?
Because whenever I saw the material lying on the ground, on the roadside, behind the hotels, restaurants. I used to collect these things on my bicycle.
So you gathered all the materials on your bicycle?
Yes,
Must have been quite a job.
it was a hard work. My job was also a hard work, and this to bring the stones from hills, it is also very difficult job.
And you have people, I imagine, from all over the world coming here. Did you ever imagine that would be the case when you were quietly making this work?
Never. I never imagined.
What a life.
It is a God gift.
I bet people thought, oh, there's that mad bloke again, riding around collecting up all his rubbish. And they didn't know that secretly he was creating this stony jewel in the middle of the jungle. I mean, how romantic is that? That's the best garden story in the history of the world.
The visitor to this garden enters into a private fantasy world, linked by narrow passageways and deep gorges twisting through its maze-like structure.
Look at that. Look at that. Look at that.
Everything is strange. Everything is a delight.
Everywhere you look, there's something extraordinary and something that assaults you and challenges preconceptions. And that's what this garden is doing. Every little twist and turn, you think, wow, what's going on there? See, this kind of thing is really good. Broken, I don't know what, stone bosses, all different sizes, put irregularly on a path. Now, all conventional logic says either space them evenly or put them to one side, but I like the fact you've got to negotiate your way and pay attention. My theory is that gardening is grown-ups going outside to play. And if you garden in the same spirit as you went out when you were a child on a lovely summer's day and made camps and played cowboys and Indians or whatever it was you played and ran around and then came in all hungry and had your tea, then A, you'll enjoy gardening more, and B, the gardens will be much better. And this exemplifies that. See, look at that man there holding his cup. And others holding old cups. He's made out of cups. And here we seem to have sort of most of Indian wildlife. You've got macaques and you've got leopards or tigers and poor old skinny elephants. It's really good fun. Can you think of a better way of recycling than making it into beautiful art? Should be compulsory. Do something beautiful with your rubbish. I've just been overwhelmed and delighted by this garden. I've just loved it. And it seems to me a perfect modern image that represents India and humanity beautifully. It's one of the most pleasurable gardens I've ever visited, and I think one of the great gardens of the world.
I said at the beginning of this journey that I was a bit daunted. The extremes of India seemed so shocking and its life force so fierce that I wondered how I would cope. But I have been completely seduced by the place. Through its gardens I've had an intoxicating taste of its plants, people, history and landscape. From the paradise gardens of the Mughal emperors to private pieces of tame jungle and the lovely patterned landscapes of the tea gardens, India is the most life-enhancing place that I have ever visited.
And to finish in this garden, which is modern, based entirely on humanity, on one man's vision, and yet visited and shared literally by millions every year, seems to me a great symbol for modern India. And I leave not remotely daunted, but full of hope.